Hi, welcome to the Photo Flunky Show, episode 136. Today we're going to give you our top 10 list of common mistakes by beginning photographers. Hi, my name is William Beem.
Hi, my name is Lee Beem.
And we help photographers become better visual storytellers so they can take better photos to share, sell, and remember. And I got to admit, I was once a beginning photographer.
Funny, me too.
I think sometimes I still am. In this show, we just kind of want to remind you of a few things. And first off, all of us had to begin somewhere. And I don't want that, if you're a beginning photographer, I don't want that really to be a platitude. Some of these things we have to remind ourselves all the time. And what we want you to think of is to be mindful of your settings as well as your subject. Slow down your photography a little bit. And remember, everyone makes mistakes. I don't care if you're just starting out or you've been doing this for 30 years. Mistakes are part of photography. You just don't show them.
Yeah, that's true.
All right, why don't we go ahead and get into this, because these topics are pretty, like I said, they're pretty common, but yet when you get a camera, you're excited and you're really looking into things, it's almost easy to forget about the settings on your camera.
Yeah.
Particularly when you're a beginner, I think you get used to having previously shot with an iPhone or something with automatic settings, and now you're in a different world.
This is true. And I mean, even if you're just kind of almost overly comfortable with what you do with your camera and you're not a beginner, at what stage you decide that you're not a beginner anymore. But I've been doing this long enough that I don't feel like I'm a beginner, but I still sometimes realize midway through, what is going on here? Oh, I've still got it set up from the last time I shot.
And that happens quite frequently. And we kind of want to talk you through some of those settings towards the end of this. But let's start off with the number one mistake I see is simply the wrong exposure settings.
Yeah.
You're overexposed, you're underexposed is kind of easier to work out with. But the real challenge is when you find out that you have a lot of harsh shadow or harsh lighting in the same frame. Maybe you blow out the sky or someone's face is too dark. You need to pick what your subject is and expose for your subject, and then find ways to compensate for the other parts.
That's true. And that might mean moving your subject, moving yourself.
It's amazing how many exposure problems you can resolve simply by moving a few inches.
Yeah.
I mean, changing your composition.
Change your angle. Yeah.
Another one we have is forgetting to set your white balance. And this can be huge.
Yes.
White balance is really a compensation for the color temperature of the light that you're dealing with. If you're indoors, you might have incandescent lights that are very warm. If you're outdoors, it's kind of a neutral time. If you're sunrise or sunset, you're going to have a different kind of glow to the evening. And you just simply need to check your white balance and make sure that you have the correct settings. And sometimes you might have multiple sources. So for example, there's a white balance setting for your flash because of the light output it's going to have that doesn't really balance with the rest of the room.
That's true.
I know that some of my favorite shots that when I was starting off were just really screwed up because of two things. One, I had the wrong white balance and I was so excited by the subject I was shooting. I just wanted to get that shot and I hadn't checked everything. And two is the next one I'm going to bring up is we really want you to shoot in RAW instead of JPEG.
Yeah, and that's kind of connected to the white balance because you have more chance of saving your photo if you messed up the white balance if you shot in RAW than you do in JPEG. And I speak from experience.
We all do. These are mistakes that both of us have made, and so has many, many other photographers. So don't think that we're preaching or talking down to you. The reason we know this list is because we made every single one of these mistakes. When you're in RAW mode, you have all this data about your photograph, and you can change the white balance from one end of the scale to the other. So if you make a mistake while you're shooting, you can go back and correct it later if you have a tool like Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw, or some of the other RAW editors, On One Photo Raw or Skylum's Luminar. All these tools, if you have a RAW photo, will help you change your white balance to what it needs to be. If you shoot in JPEG, you have limited information, and that white balance slider doesn't help every little situation.
No, it really doesn't.
So we're really recommending that you shoot in RAW. Now, when I first started with my DSLR, the very first one I got, I looked at it and I thought, man, RAW takes up this much space. I only get this many photos if I shoot RAW. But if I shoot JPEG, man, I can get nearly 1,000 or so photos on this card.
I know, and it's easy to think like that when you're a new photographer. I mean, also, I think when I was newer to photography, the size of your SD cards and the price of them for space it was a really different world. I mean, it cost a lot of money to get a lot of storage on an SD card. So I was trying to be conservative because basically it was expensive to
That was my
take up
reason.
space.
That was my reason for shooting JPEG. Is I thought, man, it costs a lot of money to get these cards. And back then, I wasn't shooting with 64 or 128 gig cards. I was shooting with like an 8 gig card.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when the 1 gig card first came out and people went like, what are you going to do with all that space? Who needs it?
1 gig for JPEG is just enormous. 1 gig for RAW, not so much.
No.
And my camera is a Nikon D800 with 36 megapixels. So we're talking close to what, 28, 30 megabytes for each. We're talking about some large space for each photo that goes there. It adds up. So when you add those megabytes in there, and suddenly that 1 gigabyte card is not really going to give you that many photos. Yeah. But we really do advise shooting in RAW and using a post-processing tool so that you can take advantage of the RAW file. Keep in mind, RAW is not a photographic format. JPEG is a photographic format. And there's a JPEG inside every RAW photo. A RAW image is nothing more than a database that you can use to create a JPEG or PNG or TIFF, other types of photos from that data using a tool like Lightroom. So I know it takes up space. You're going to spend more money on the card, but it is worth it because it will save your butt and give you a lot more opportunities to develop your photos in the future.
Absolutely.
Right. We talked about speed going from one to the other, and this is a thing that still burns me. And this, I'm talking about going too fast, and that is not remembering to change your settings from one scene to the next. I'm shooting outdoors. Oh, we're going inside now? Okay, let me shoot there, and I haven't changed anything on my camera.
Yeah.
Why do my photos look different?
I know. I mean, unless you're shooting in fully auto mode, you're going to have some problems. And really, there's a compromise that comes with shooting fully auto because the camera doesn't see everything the way the eye does. So you're going to be able to make adjustments.
Honestly, I don't think there's really a purpose to shooting fully auto with a DSLR. I don't mind some auto modes. I'm quite happy to shoot with aperture priority and let it determine, the shutter speed. But I want to set my ISO. I want to set my aperture, and I'll let it choose the shutter speed until that shutter speed is maybe too slow. Like if I go from bright sun outside and I go inside, a couple things are going to happen. One, I've got much less available light to me, assuming we're talking about during the daytime. Two, the color temperature of the light's changed.
Yeah.
So that's where that white balance issue comes back in. And now if I don't change my ISO, if I don't change my aperture or my shutter speed, I might end up with blurry shots because the shutter speed is decreased because there's not enough light.
That's right. It might be too slow for you to hold it.
So when you move from one environment to another, you need to check your camera and change your settings because your environment is different. The light is different. The character of the light is different. All of those things matter. And you just can't walk around like you've got an iPhone. Unfortunately, with a DSLR, you're expected to think.
Just it comes with the box.
And all right, we're halfway there. Number 5 is not understanding or using lighting conditions. And what does that mean, really? It's like, as you take more and more photos, you learn to evaluate the light. And when I say that, you're evaluating the direction that it's coming from. You're evaluating the color of the light. You're evaluating the quality. So is it hard light that's going to cause a hard shadow, or is it soft light? You need to start looking at these things and see how the light falls on your subject. And then maybe you make decisions to change your subject around, or you move around your subject so that the light falls in a way that you create interesting shadows or get the result that you want. But really not paying attention to the lighting environment, or maybe having a real bright hot spot just right behind your subject. Any number of these things. The light is your tool, and that's what you really have to learn to pay attention to. Another one that's one of my favorites, and this I do with iPhones all the time, because I can just keep pushing that button, and it's really snapping rather than composing.
Yeah, just kind of randomly hold the phone up, and like as soon as the subject appears somewhere in the frame, just click, click, click. I see this all the time. When we used to vacation at Disney World, it always amazed me. I used to watch people who were walking along and they'd see something. They wouldn't even stop or slow down. They'd just hold their phone up and kind of click, 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 and then put it down without looking at it. I used to think, I wonder what they got. I was always wanted to go and say to them, can I see your photos? Because they didn't even care. One of
my favorite things when I was at Disney World, I was shooting Cinderella Castle as the sunset was coming down. I had my tripod and I'm getting everything just right, And this guy, he's by himself. He's walking from right to left across in front of my camera. And I catch his eye, as he's walking through. He sees me. He sees I've got the camera. Then he looks the opposite way and sees what I'm shooting at. And he stands right in front of my lens, holds up his phone, not a smartphone, mind you. We're talking like a flip up phone.
Yeah.
And he just holds it up there, aims it at the castle, and boop, clicks the button, snaps it shut, and walks off.
Yeah, a good camera took that photo. So therefore, I'll take the photo. It will be just as good. Yeah.
I thought it was hilarious. It's like he walked up like, yeah, I want that one too. If he's going to get it, I want it too. Look, with snapping rather than composing, what that really means is taking some time, slowing down, and making quality decisions about what is in and what shouldn't be in your photograph.
Well, this is it, and just completely dismissing the space and memory cards now. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I know people and have known people who love to come home and say, wow, I was on vacation today and I reeled off like 1,500 shots today. It kind of means nothing to me, because if you are just clicking, you've got a heck of a lot of stuff to go through and sift through for post-processing, unless you really had it nailed for all of them, which nobody does. I would prefer to come back. I take as many as I can that I think are going to work, but I'm not having some kind of contest with myself to be a good photographer and earn my way there by seeing how many shots I can rattle off without killing the battery in one shoot. It's think about the photo. The reason that I'll try it again is because maybe I think I could do it better than I did the time before. So you do take multiple shots, but there's a purpose for it.
And I'm not saying that you shouldn't take multiple shots and like just set it up, take all your time and then get one good click. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying set it up, get the composition that you want, and then take a few different shots. Earlier today, Lee and I were doing some portraits. She had some things that she needed for some products. And for every pose that she needed to make, I took 3 or 4 clicks. And the reason is because there are some things you just can't control. I look at one of them and her eyes, are kind of closed.
Yeah.
If people blink, you can't really stop that from happening. And people are guaranteed to blink when you're taking their photo.
Well, lights go off. My eyes are particularly sensitive to lights. If I'm with a photographer or with somebody who isn't used to taking photos of me, I'll let them know you'll need a few. My eyes close as soon as there's light.
But it's not really just your eyes. Your smile changes, your head tilt changes. And I give you 3 or 4 so you can look at them and say, oh, I like this one a little bit better than that one. If you'd only seen the one, you probably would have been happy with that.
Yeah.
But when you've got a couple of them to choose from, just because of those minute changes from one second to the next, you've got an option to choose, you know what, this one suits me best.
And also, I mean, you know me, I don't really, I'm not comfortable posing. So usually what happens as soon as there's something, a new scene or a new setting, or I'm doing something different, I'm kind of consciously posed for the first one. And as I start moving, I relax into it. So usually the later shots are better.
And it's not just the subject that may potentially move. It's also the photographer. I was sitting there, I was doing these shots handheld. And as we're looking back through them, some of the shots, I think her foot was a little too close to the edge for my taste, because I like to leave room to crop in or move things around. And I look at the shots and oh, no, that's not good. I messed up on that one. Because I'm looking at her face, I'm watching for certain things, and then the bottom of the frame edged up on her feet. It didn't cut them off, but it was just like right there on the line.
Yeah.
And that doesn't give us room for what we want to do in post. So both your subject may change, and if you're doing handheld, you may change. Just these things happen. Even if you're on a tripod, I've been on a tripod, and then next thing you know, my big clumsy foot kicked it.
I've done that.
So take your time, compose. Don't just, go around snapping.
And review the stuff. That's the whole thing as well. Review the stuff before you move on. Like every so many shots, take a look and see what you have.
All right. The next item we touched on a little earlier, but I want to explain some of the reasons why. And that is, one of the mistakes is relying too much on auto settings. When you're on auto settings, you're not in control. The camera's in control. And honestly, the camera's not as smart as you are. It is trying to render everything as a neutral gray color. So if you're in the north and you want to take beautiful pictures of white snow, its default is going to make that snow gray because it thinks it's too bright.
Yeah.
There are times when you do want to overexpose something or underexpose something. There are times when you want to see shadows or more depth of field or less depth of field. I would say that when you're taking photos of something and you're taking your time to compose, also take your time to vary your settings.
Yeah.
See what works. I mean, you may have this beautiful lens that goes to f1.4 and you've got this really shallow depth of field. That's lovely. But it's also You might find out that if you're taking a photo of someone, it's got a razor thin depth of field. Maybe one eye is out of focus and one eye is in focus. And that's really hard to tell when you're looking at the small screen on the back of your camera.
True. Yeah.
You want to vary that and see what does it look like if you move it up to f3.5, maybe you need to get more of the face in focus and still have some blur in the background. There are all sorts of things that can happen. In architectural photography, sometimes I like to shoot at really small apertures, f16, f22, because then the light fall off changes and you can control where the light shows up. Instead of just being light on everything, suddenly you see shadows creep in as you're changing that aperture setting.
That's true. Yeah.
Don't rely too much on auto settings. You're missing photos that you could find if you explore just changing some of those settings around. Oh, this is one of my favorite. Cluttered backgrounds. Ask Lee how much I love cluttered backgrounds.
Yeah, I know. And I'm pretty much the same. I kind of grew up with an intolerance for cluttered backgrounds. Even before I understood anything about photography, I was exposed to it and it always bugged me.
A few episodes back, we were talking about a photo shoot we had with a friend of ours. And she is, a bodybuilder bikini competition competitor. I don't even know what the name is of it. She was going into a competition and we wanted to do some shots of her in a gym. And the gym is not really a clean environment. And I don't mean that it was dirty or filthy or anything like that. What I mean is there's a lot of machinery behind it. There were mirrors on 3 of the 4 walls.
There was a lot of stuff.
A lot of things that could distract from her, who is really the subject. We got shots that she loved. But for me, as something that I would put in my portfolio, I would say no, because there was simply too much going on in the background. It was too busy of a photograph. To me, the better photographs are the ones that distill everything down to just the stuff that should be there and nothing else added.
I agree. Yeah, you want to isolate your subject in some way or another, even if you're connecting them to their environment. You don't want the environment to overcrowd your subject.
You don't want to detract from your subject, but you can take this to extremes in what I call the sticks in water photos. I don't know why. Some photographers really do love this. They will go to a body of water that has some pilings or, where there used to be a dock or something, and there's sticks in the water. And they want to do a long exposure so that all the water gets glassy. There's no clouds in the sky because any clouds may have just moved on and got smoothed out. And then there's just sharpness on the sticks in the water. I get that. That is a very minimalist photograph. It's not one that appeals to me. But that's really what the purpose is. You're trying to just make everything calm and serene. My idea of a portrait is a little different than that. I don't want the background to fight with my subject, but also I don't want it to be devoid of everything. That's
true. Yeah, you want it to be part of it. It's part of the story.
And this is really your personal challenge. So if you see, something sticking in that you think is going to distract from your subject, either change your composition or if you can, move it. You want to eliminate things and stay away from cluttered backgrounds. Number 9 is another one of my favorites, using the wrong focal length. You're laughing at me. Go ahead.
Oh, no, because I see this all the time. And when you see it a lot if you look at social media because everybody's using a mobile phone.
And they like wide angles.
And mobile phones are wide angle lenses. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. That's just, it is what it is. You see people, you need to position yourself right in the center of the lens. Figure out how you're going to crop it, but get your face or the subject's face right in the middle.
That's something that other photographers would call out as their top 10, at least one of their top 10 things is putting everything in the center of the frame. They'll talk about rule of thirds and leading lines and so forth like that. I'm not really going to go there because I think there are times when you need to break those rules and put something in the center of your frame. And this is one of them because of the distortion that happens from a wide angle lens. You put somebody on one side or the other of a wide angle lens and they're going to have distortion on them.
They are.
But the other part is if you break the kind of the little plane between where your main subject is and the lens. So for example, if somebody's feet are moving towards the camera or they're reaching out for it, those are going to look enormous compared to the rest of their body.
See, the way I work around that, if I'm just doing snapshots for social media, is I put it into portrait or into landscape. I put it into landscape orientation. And although whatever I want is centered in the middle, I angle the camera, like I literally on a horizontal plane, I kind of tilt it away from or towards me, but I make sure that my head is still in there. That way you can get some interesting angles. But like William says, you need to just be mindful of what is nearest to the edges and closest to the lens, because that is what's going to appear the largest and very exaggerated
And this is
large.
something, if you're taking photographs of a person with a wide angle lens, simply the height of your lens compared to that person could really exaggerate the wrong feature.
Yeah.
And Lee's corrected me on this on a few times, because when I take photographs, I usually get down on one knee and take shots like that with my DSLR. And when I do the same thing with an iPhone, she'll say, no, 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 no. Because what's going to happen is it's going to make her midsection look larger.
Yep.
And her head looks smaller.
It's going to make the hips and everything look bigger and everything else smaller. And you know what? This is something that's kind of caught on with people. And I'm guessing that somewhere along, people are just into their, I don't want to say iPhones, because there are other phones that are getting used as well, but into mobile phone photography now with the better cameras and lenses. We were in the gym the other day, and one of the personal trainers said, "Oh, I'll take the photo of the three of you girls." And the first thing he did was he got down onto his knees. And I said, "Don't do that. Please don't do that. Can you stand up and take it down?" And he said, No, I've got friends who are photographers. They're professional photographers. And I said to him, they are correct when they're shooting with a camera. I said, and the girls next to me were screaming, don't get down. You're going to make my hips look big. It's not what he was doing that was wrong. It was just that wide angle lens.
Well, the layman will hear a piece of advice and assume it applies to everything. And that's simply what happens here. And this is why we're calling this a beginner mistake. Because, yeah, you'll hear your advice when you're working with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. Get down on one knee, because you don't want to be, shooting down on them, something of that nature. You want to give them a look that there is a bit more strength and posture to them. But when you do this with a smartphone or a wide angle lens on a DSLR, all you're doing is you're shrinking them in height and stature rather than elongating them, and you're making their middle look larger.
So it's like one of those round mirrors, those fun, crazy mirrors that distort you. You get the round ones that are bulbed out towards you, and it makes you look wide in the middle and tiny on the edges. That's pretty much what it does.
But there's another aspect of wide angle lenses is it doesn't bring your environment in. When you shoot at 200 millimeters, it really gives you a narrow angle of view. And things that when you shoot at a wide angle, you might see a house in the background, a fire hydrant, a tree, whatever. You shoot the same thing at 200 millimeters, all those things are suddenly out of your view.
Yeah.
They come in closer from the background. So your depth in your photography from foreground to middle and background is much wider or more distant from each other, apparently so, at a wide angle than it is with a telephoto.
Yeah, the telephoto, I think I always like to say it pulls things together.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that's compression. It's really not, but that's okay. That's an argument for another episode. Number 10, and this is one of the ones I threw in there. I don't know if Lee's going to agree with me or not, but fearing flash.
No, that's true.
Look, there are a lot of people that still feel very, very uncomfortable using flash. I get it. I made a lot of horrible flash photos when I started using it, but you have to make some mistakes and learn from them in order to get better. And the nice thing about using flash and knowing how to use it is that when you get into these situations where maybe you're taking a picture of someone on the beach, you want the sun in the background, their face is too dark. You have to throw some light on their face.
Yeah.
And the sun's not going to do it for you because it's behind them. You've got two options. You can have a big reflector that aims in their face, or you can have a flash that aims in their face. There are a multitude of opportunities to improve your photography using flash. And as you use flash, you start learning more about light because you're the one who's in charge of it. You get to decide if it's soft or harsh, what direction it comes from, what color it is if you put some gels on it. So you have a number of decisions to make when you're using flash, and that helps you understand how to evaluate light, which is one of our previous points. So I think that fearing flash is something that it's really not a big deal. Flash is really pretty easy to use once you get a foundation for it, and don't be afraid of it. You'll make some mistakes, but you know what? Set aside some time to make mistakes. Get, your favorite person, or get your favorite, I don't know, if you got a puppet or a doll, just put it there and start taking some pictures. It won't complain. Okay. We all wanted to do 10, but you know what? We got a bonus tip for you. And because we were just talking about this the other day, and that is to avoid shooting in burst mode.
Yeah, I don't do it. There are certain situations where it makes sense and it's a good idea. But most of the time, I learned really quickly not to do it.
Look, people want to shoot in burst mode because they're afraid of missing something. And that's kind of the difference between, am I creating a photograph or am I just capturing something that's happening? I use burst mode when I'm shooting HDR because, I want to get frame after frame at different exposures that I'm going to combine later on. But as far as shooting burst mode, I think, unless you're shooting sports because you don't know exactly where the football player is going to be or the basketball player, burst mode is taking away your creativity.
See, I found, and somebody's probably going to argue with me, but there is no doubt to me that no matter what camera or phone I'm shooting with, burst mode, the quality is not quite the same for each frame as what it is if I just physically click the button each time, even if it's in quick succession. So I turn burst mode off.
Okay, when you talk about the quality is different, what have you seen?
There's a lack of sharpness. And it's unmistakable. This is not just on the iPhone. This is on previous cameras I've used. This is on my DSLR. It's even in good lighting. I'm talking about outdoors because that's usually where it happens. Burst mode is it's not a huge deal, but when I take it into Lightroom, it's unmistakable.
You know what? I can understand that to an extent because you're going to be hand-holding most of the times when you're doing burst mode. When I'm doing HDR, I've got it on a tripod. But let's say you're hand-holding doing burst mode. You're going to have minor handshake and movements from one shot to the next, even in burst mode. And that little bit of movement might be enough, depending upon your shutter speed, to introduce just a little bit of blur, a little bit of softness on your subject.
Okay.
So that could be why you're not getting the sharpness that you're expecting.
All right. I didn't know why, but that's something I've learned and I don't use it.
See, there you go. We even learn things on this show. Thank you so much for joining us on the Photo Flunky Show. We hope this helped you. We hope you learned something from this. And by all means, if you have questions, let us know. You can reach us at williambeam.com/episode 136 and leave your question in the comments. Links to subscribe are going to be on that episode with show notes. Also at photoflunky.com where we've got a player. And you know what? If you want to subscribe, go right ahead. You can find us at williambeam.com/iTunes. It'll take you right to the page there to subscribe. If you're listening on your mobile device, please subscribe now, and that way you'll get every show delivered to you for free. Every Wednesday at 10 is when we put them out. Thank you very much. We'll see you again next week.